California edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Thanks for joining us. Our guest, Jacque Robinson, member of the Pasadena City Council. And Pasadena has football fever, but some don't like it.
Some don't.
And so I want to speak with you about the controversy surrounding football fever. The Rose Bowl. Where does the Rose Bowl play into the calculation in bringing a new football team to Los Angeles?
Well, Pasadena has a very unique opportunity right now to be able to contend to be the temporary host of a permanent team, should a permanent team decide to relocate to Los Angeles.
And the key is temporary.
The key is temporary.
The Rose Bowl is not competing to be the full-time stadium.
That's correct.
And the voters said as such in 2006.
That's correct.
The voters have been very clear.
Yes.
So talk to us about the temporary element, and then we'll get into the controversy.
Well, the City Council recently certified the EIR, which would allow us to continue and have discussions if the opportunity comes for an NFL team to relocate to the Los Angeles area. Now, that's conditional upon
of course
the team first deciding to relocate to California,
right,
and then either the City of Los Angeles or the City of Industry adopting that team as its permanent team.
I think it's fair to say that the constituents living in the district that would be impacted by a temporary placement of an NFL team, they're concerned.
Yes, and very rightly so. They're concerned about a number of things, including traffic, including the impacts to their neighborhood, including the impacts to the Arroyo Seco area. You know, it's a very huge recreational area, not just for Pasadenans, from people throughout the San Gabriel Valley.
But they do have football fans traipsing through already. I mean, UCLA plays at the Rose Bowl.
Yes, the Rose Bowl is UCLA's home stadium.
And I have other events. There are.
We have
you have
flea market.
The flea markets, exactly.
We have the occasional soccer game. So we have a number of events
Super
by
Bowls have
city
been
ordinance
there.
that are limited to, I believe, 12 per year. And with our acceptance of the EIR, it essentially proposes that we add an additional 13 events per year at the Rose Bowl, conditional upon the NFL being temporarily playing there.
Now, when was the Rose Bowl completed?
As a structure?
Right.
I believe it was 1921.
So anyone who's living in that area has always lived in the shadow of the Rose Bowl.
Yes.
So I have heard some people say, wait a second, I mean, you moved into this neighborhood. You knew the Rose Bowl was there. The property value of your home probably is impacted by the fact that you will have some traffic going through. You know, how do you argue NIMBYism right now when it's always been there?
Well, I think that's part of the crux of the argument by the neighbors, and you know, rightfully so, they do bear a large portion of the game day impacts of using the Rose Bowl. But as City Council members, I believe we have to keep the well-being of the entire city under consideration, and so throughout the years, whether it's UCLA or the NFL, we have to find a strong balance between neighborhood concerns and the fiscal concerns of the city, and making sure that we keep the Rose Bowl you know, in good condition so that it does not become a relic, and so that we don't have to knock it down or something drastic like that.
Let's talk about that, because the Rose Bowl does need a renovation. I understand the cost will be around $200 million.
Yes.
Could the arrival of a team at the Rose Bowl temporarily help towards the renovation fund?
Yes, it's estimated that the city could very well generate between $5 and $10 million in additional revenues
a year
if the NFL were to use the stadium as a temporary home. And so, you know, the ordinance that we passed says that if all of the terms are correct, and once this comes back to the city, if and when this comes back to the City Council, they would be allowed to use it for up to 5 years, while their permanent stadium is being built either in Industry or City of Los Angeles.
That could be another $50 million.
That could, and that could very much help with the renovation. But I would say those revenues should not only be limited to plugging our renovation shortfall. You know, it could be used to better the open space that's down there. It could be used to expand our Summer Rose youth employment program. So there's a number of uses that we very well could use that money for.
But as part of a negotiation, could you not seek an additional stipend from the NFL team to provide money directly to the renovation fund?
I suppose that's an option. You know, negotiations, I believe the sky's the limit in negotiations.
Sure.
That's what that's for. And of course, you know, all of the testimony that we heard throughout the EIR process, and in fact, throughout the many years that we've been discussing the NFL's possibility of being in Pasadena will be taken into consideration, not just by myself, but I believe by the entire council.
Now, the vote was nearly unanimous, is that right?
Yes, 7-1.
7-1. One of the members that voted in favor is Steve Madison, who represents that area. Voters in that area are now planning to launch a recall petition drive against him. Not the other 6 of you who voted yes, just him. I mean, if he had voted no, it wouldn't have mattered.
Right.
It would have been 6-2. Or what do you make of the rumblings against Mr. Madison?
Well, I think people are upset at the possibility that, you know, their quality of life could be impacted if the NFL decides to relocate to Pasadena. But I believe launching a recall against Councilmember Madison is drastic. I don't think that the recall process should be used for simple disagreements. And, you know, we're on a city council. Everything we do is a compromise. We take into consideration, you know, constituents' input, and that doesn't necessarily mean that things are going to go your way all the time. But if the reason for the recall is simply because he voted the way he did, then that could be applied to any of us, including the mayor. And so I think we really need to look at, you know, the reasons why, or they need to at least look at really look at the reasons why they want to launch a recall, and think about would that help not just their efforts, but in general the democratic process in the long run. Because if we solely base it on disagreements, we would be recalling all the time.
How did the mayor vote?
The mayor voted in favor as well, and you know, he, Councilmember McAustin, and all of us realized that this is not a vote to say yes, we want the NFL in Pasadena. This is a vote to say we would like to continue those discussions and possibly have the option.
I want to shift gears, if I may. You recently were heavily involved in a campaign, yes on Prop 30, no on Prop 32. Both of those campaigns were victorious.
Yes.
I have to tell you, and I said this to you off camera, I think most people expected Prop 32 to go down. That was a proposition that would have limited political involvement by unions, arguably corporations, but we won't get into that. Prop 30, I thought it was going to lose. I'll say that right on camera. I did not expect it to win. Won with over 55% of the vote.
Yes.
It was not close.
Well, I think that was a testimony to the strong coalition that came out to support Prop 30 and that was supportive of it. I think it's a testimony to all of the work that was done in Los Angeles County. I believe, you know, when the results were coming out, that Los Angeles County was the last to be counted, and that's what put, you know, its passage over the top. And so, you know, very much so, I think Los Angeles County played a huge role in enabling Prop 30 to pass.
What does it say to you as a sitting council member that the state, and specifically LA County, and specifically Pasadena, voted so strongly for Prop 30 to increase taxes on themselves?
Well, I think it clearly demonstrates that people really care about public education, and if that means that we have to tax ourselves a little extra and bear the brunt now for the future of our children, then that's what we'll do. And I also think that because it not only applied to education, but ensured our public safety with the public safety dollars that are going to be coming to local government.
Towards realignment.
That helped as well. And
so again, where does the coalition go from here? This coalition that works so effectively to support Prop 30 and oppose Prop 32?
Well, I very much think that we have to be very careful and make sure that we do what we said we were going to do with the money. That we're responsible with the money, and that we can demonstrate to taxpayers that this was the right thing to do, and that we're going to be responsible and make the most impact with dollars.
Because at the same time,
because it doesn't solve the total budget picture by any means.
And at the same time, we had a Democratic landslide in the state of California, and now we have Democrats controlling both houses in Sacramento.
Right.
So
I mean, I definitely think we have to be careful and not take advantage of that, so to speak. Demonstrate that we can be trustworthy with the dollars that the public has entrusted to us thus far.
No doubt.
And use our numbers for good. For
okay.
The greater good.
Her name is Jacque Robinson. She's a member of the Pasadena City Council. My name is Brad Pomerance. This is California Edition.
In what year did the Raiders play their last game in Los Angeles? The Raiders played their last game on December 24th, 1994.
I'm Jacque Robinson, council member in the city of Pasadena, and I'd like to take a moment to wish you and your family a happy holiday season and a healthy new year. I hope you get to spend the season with your family and friends, and wish you all the best in 2013.
This is California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. I'm glad you're with us today. Our guest, Janet Chin, she is a trustee on the Garvey Unified School District. And I want to speak with you, Janet, about the politics of what we know as the recall. California recalled its governor in 2003, Gray Davis. In Wisconsin, there was an attempt to recall its governor. It went down.
Right.
In Pasadena, recall petitions have been pulled against Steve Madison, a council member, because he voted in favor of looking at whether the NFL should temporarily house a team at the Rose Bowl. And now Janet Chin is seeing a group trying to recall her because of her support of a sitting superintendent. Before we talk about your situation, what do you make of the politics of the recall?
Recalls are a way to embarrass politicians. I think that's one of the main things that the emphasis is really on that.
Right.
We're seeing recalls on a local level now, I mean, with city council members and school board members, and it's really about the reform or the direction, in my case, where education is going.
And what's interesting is, when we thought about recalls in the past, it really was to recall scoundrels, I guess you could say. And I've heard many prognosticators, many political scientists say the recall wasn't intended to remove someone from office because of policy disagreements.
Right.
I mean, you were recently reelected in 2011, and this recall petition is now swirling around you. What do you make of this new attempt to disagree with sitting officials?
The dynamics within politics right now, it's really about, who wants to change, who's in control, and who gets people elected.
Right.
So if we look at unions, we look at PACs, we look at how people are getting elected, and how much money is thrust, into their campaigns. It's really a force to make policy changes, and that's just the direction that local politics are going.
And what's interesting about the attempt to recall you is it is public knowledge you have filed papers to run for the Rosemead City Council.
Correct.
That election will be held in March. If you're successful, you will have to resign from the board in which these people are looking to recall you. And so I'm wondering if this recall effort is more about trying to damage a city council race in Rosemead.
It could possibly be. My take is that I am completely proud, and I feel like I've completed everything that I need to complete on the school district.
Right.
And it is time for me to move forward and give back to my community in which I grew up in. So I think that the reality of it is that, recalls, again, are about either, trying to get somebody to not be able to move forward
Right.
in some ways.
I mean, you've not been accused of impropriety per se.
I have not.
I mean, I know there's some crazy allegations. I'm a neutral journalist about the fact that you have a foundation, and somehow that's a conflict of interest, but there's no bona fide allegations coming at you.
Well, I'll tell you about this specific recall, or the intent to recall, is really it's being spearheaded by another school board member.
Yes.
Yes.
And that, one could argue, is amongst the ugliest intra-battle disputes you could ever imagine, that one of your own colleagues is involved. And as I understand it, it really comes out of your support of the sitting superintendent.
Correct.
I mean, you're allowed to have policy disagreements on a school board. It's surprising that that is the basis upon which a fellow member of yours is coming out against you. I also wonder, though, there are two other board members that voted in favor of the sitting superintendent. They are not the subject of recall petitions. Why?
They actually are the subject of the recall, but unfortunately,
For them. Yeah.
They are going to be reelected or running for reelection in November. So
The petitions won't be ripe.
they will not be.
And so as a result, it really becomes a waste of time.
Correct.
Because they're up for election in less than a year at this stage.
Right.
So I wonder, though, and this is my analysis, not yours, if this attempt to recall you, which still is just an attempt, I mean, the groups have to gather signatures, which can be very challenging.
Yes.
But I wonder if it actually can help your career. I mean, because look, all name ID is good name ID. And all they're doing is putting that name out there, Janet Chin. And I'm just wondering, maybe this is a blessing in disguise.
Well, even though I am disappointed with the fact that, there is this kind of ugly recall
Right.
going on. I do appreciate that the community is actually voicing their opinions, and they are participating in the
Okay.
democratic process.
Well stated.
Yes, but I have to say that within the last 24 months, this superintendent, Dr. Sandra Johnson, has really made enormous changes, and we've reorganized in our administration, and so, you know, we're very supportive of our teachers and our unions, and I think that our teachers are just upset at the reform, because it's not about money. In this case, it's not about money.
What's interesting is your school board 5 members?
We are 5 members.
And how many of those 5 have children in the Garvey Unified School District?
I am the only one currently.
Right.
Yes.
So, you know, it begs the question. I mean, if anyone knows how reforms are being effectuated, Mama Chin presumably would be one of them. Your kids are there, correct?
They are.
I want to shift gears slightly. Still talk about the democratic process. I want to talk about the recent election. As you know, President Obama was victorious. Yes. What was most surprising for many was the dramatic support he received from Asian Americans, of which you are one.
Yes.
To say that support amongst Asian Americans of Democratic candidates has soared would only be described as an understatement. In 1992, Bill Clinton received 31% of the Asian American vote. In 2012, Barack Obama received 73% of the Asian American vote, more than the Latino vote. Latinos voted 71% for Barack Obama. When I was studying political science, Asian Americans were like the die-hard core Republican constituency. What's happened in 20 years?
Well, first of all, I'm really happy that Asian Americans are finally being seen as a viable piece of the democratic process. I do believe that because Asian Americans are mostly declined to state, they usually don't choose, right?
That is true.
So, you know, it was a little tough to kind of like survey them. So in the dynamics of politics, either side, you don't really know, which way they're going to go. I mean, look at the recent 49th district, assembly district race, right? Was
that with Ed Chow and Matthew Lin?
Correct.
Right, and that was a heated race between 2 Asian Americans.
Correct.
But the Democrat won with more than 55% of the vote, I believe, against a very viable Republican opponent with a tremendous biographical sketch.
Right.
So what's happening? Why are Asian Americans breaking so strongly for the Democrats?
I think the San Gabriel Valley specifically, because we are the highest concentration.
I
know, but I want to
talk about the San Gabriel Valley.
Yeah, let's just put it in perspective of the area that I'm from. We're looking at Asian Americans who are very much for that democratic process, the democratic agenda.
Big D?
Yes.
Big D.
Big D.
So it's education.
Yes. Women's rights.
Yes.
Yes.
Healthcare reform, I understand.
Healthcare reform.
I was reading polls that had the Obama plan at higher approval amongst Asian Americans than the rest of the population.
Correct.
The question, though, is what can the Democrats do, and you're a Democrat yourself, to solidify the Asian American bloc in their camp? Because if those numbers hold, it really becomes very difficult for the Republicans to make headway.
Well, it's important to see who the leadership is also, who's running, and it's about a quality Democrat running.
I want to ask you about 2 Democrats, Mark Takano and Ami Bera. California is sending 2 Asian Americans to Congress. One of them a gay Asian American, Mark Takano. How does that make you feel? Other than the obvious.
I'm extremely proud, being very progressive myself.
Right.
And being able to see that there is a pathway to get to Congress.
It is
for somebody who looks like me.
Right. It is a stunning development, and one that I know political scientists will look at for years to come.
We will be studying.
Yes, her name is Janet Chen. She's a member of the Garvey Unified School District School Board. She's also running for Rosemead City Council. That election will be held in March 2013. My name is Brad Pomerance. You're watching California Edition.
12 Asian Americans will serve the U.S. Congress in 2013-14. How many Latinos will serve in the U.S. Congress in 2013-14? 31 Latinos will serve in the U.S. Congress in 2013-14, 9 from the state of California.
It's California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We thank you for joining us. Our guest, Fred Sykes, he is a member of the West Covina City Council. And sir, I want to speak with you about the recent election in November. We know that there was some serious voter turnout among certain segments of the population. Young voters came out in large numbers in California. Your city, though, did not see a very high voter turnout, and that is concerning to you. Let's talk about that. What do you think happened?
Well, first of all, one of the phrases that comes to mind when I look at my city is apathy is very costly. Not to pay attention cost us tremendously. And in this election, the folks feel comfortable in West Covina. They still feel comfortable. And so when they feel—
Is that a bad thing?
Well, they feel comfortable because it's like, sometimes with, information, if you don't have it,
right.
if you're not aware of impending situations, you stay comfortable. It's like, look at the earthquake situation for us. We know what happened in New York with the superstorm.
Hurricane Sandy.
And so, but our preparations are not that much different. Theirs was powered by the force of water, and ours will be generally forced by, say, for instance, the earthquakes. That's what we have, impending disasters that we need to build around and prepare for.
And what's interesting about West Covina is it's a city in transition demographically, yet if you look at the city council doesn't look like the city by any stretch of the imagination. And of course, I'm not a bean counter, and I think anyone can represent anyone. I live in an area that is represented almost exclusively by African Americans, and it's my pleasure. They're wonderful public servants. That being said, the members of the city council don't really look like the residents of West Covina.
Thank you for bringing that up. To me, the appearance isn't as important as the philosophical aspects. That's the key one. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here.
Sure. I mean, West Covina—
Because the majority of the city is not me.
Right.
They don't look like me.
Under 5% African American.
Thank you. The majority of the city, by 55 to 56%, is the Hispanics, the Latino community.
Sure.
And
But let me interrupt. But doesn't that say something positively that you have 55% of the city? Still, I know they're not all registered to vote, but you were elected from a city with a majority Hispanic population.
Exactly. But what the thing that I want to take you back to is what got me involved in the first place.
Please.
I lived there since 1978 and did not get involved. I voted with high propensity. I voted every election. But what I discovered is that I didn't vote with information. And my community is a 25-acre park. And that 25-acre park came under attack by the city council that you're speaking of. And they wanted to take away 12 acres and put in a high-rise condominium complex. That was the rumor that I had gotten. And just luckily, I had a neighbor that was kind of involved. And that's what brought me there, was his little flyer.
Sure.
And so I go to City Hall, grab my wife and my daughter, and we dashed over to City Hall to protect that park. Because when I brought there as a single man, that park was a promise that was made to me as a person who was home buying, and to make me feel comfortable about the housing stock in my neighborhood. It's a fairly small house. You may have 4 homes to 1 acre. And there's also other dense housing projects. We have a ton of condos, a ton of apartment complexes.
A lot of retail.
We also have a mobile home park. And even the homes that I live in, the single family homes, a lot of them are rental property.
But let me ask you though, so you were energized by a single issue.
Yes.
A lot of communities of color in this election cycle seem to have been energized. Voter turnout was up amongst Asian Americans, and they voted overwhelmingly for Barack Obama. Latino numbers were flat, which is better than the rest of the country because overall turnout was down. Young voters were coming out in large numbers. Why is it that in your diverse community, we're not seeing that voter turnout spike? I mean, you do have, I think your community is about 25% Asian. So there's some kind of disconnect.
Thank you. Yes. Again, like you're saying, what does that mean? Communication. That's why I'm so happy that you guys allowed me to come in, because the thing that I discovered in my fight to protect the park was how much the communication, how big the communication gap is. I found out the procedure just accidentally, how we had lost a lot of other spaces, not just that 12 acres was under threat. We lost a park called Shakespeare Park.
But here's what's interesting. As you know, one of your fellow council members, Michael Toohey, was elected to a water board. Mm-hmm. He is going to have to leave the West Covina City Council as a result. He's a sitting mayor, actually.
Right.
Do you expect there to be a scramble for his seat? Or no? Back in February 21st of my tenure, this is your first. You're about to finish your first year.
This is my first year, and so February 21st, we had a little upheaval. People were very unhappy with some of the philosophical direction that was being taken by the city, and so there was an outcry for recall, mainly and that's the reason why I feel it failed, because there was a recall. They wanted to recall everybody except me that was sitting on the city council. That's 5 people.
Were the petitions filed?
And they did all the work.
They got the signatures?
They did the basics to get the point of where you collect the signatures. But they couldn't get past that.
It's interesting.
They couldn't get enough to put it on the ballot.
You bring up recall, because I recently spoke with, and you've heard this on this episode, Jacque Robinson from Pasadena. There's a recall effort against Steve Madison because he voted in favor of looking at whether the NFL should be brought temporarily to the Rose Bowl. There's a recall against Janet Chen, Garvey Unified School District Board member, because she supports the current superintendent. There's a recall because of philosophical differences. I mean, recalls were supposed to be about getting out the scoundrels, not over philosophical differences. Am I correct?
Well, the philosophical difference of another open space being sold, that some of these seniors were very instrumental in bringing to the city, and they relished that. They're very proud of that. And so when that was being threatened, that was just a straw that broke the camel's back. And so I look at all these petitions and efforts. This is the way I look at it, my own personal view. When you're trying to do the recall, when you're trying to do the establishments of districts, when you're trying to do term limits, to me, my perspective is these are just simply adjustments that we're trying to make up for where we're really going wrong. And that's the lack of, like you're saying, that disconnect, the not paying attention, not staying abreast. And so that's what these things are. The few are trying to make these monumental adjustments. And what I'm hoping that we can do in the future is all of the little folks who got together who were trying to make these huge adjustments start working on where can we make small adjustments. Because to me, the phrase of all politics is local, that's the way I look at it, just starting small. Because as a local person without a lot of power and money, where can I make a difference realistically? It's right where I live, right at my front door. So if I start working at my front door and then you get it citywide, and then eventually you'll start to get the electorate start to pay attention to what you're doing that's different and making progress back to do what? To get rid of the scoundrels that you brought up. That you're using, use your words.
So in our final moments, you're entering your second year on the council. What are your goals as we enter your second year?
Well, it was my goal once I started was to stop the sale of open green space, in particular in the most crowded areas.
And did you stop it?
We've slowed it down. We don't have a majority yet. We need a majority on the council that cherishes and relishes the idea of open green space.
Because Toohey's leaving.
Well,
you never know.
And that's the thing. See, people aren't aware that because he's leaving. You heard of the drones, right?
We'll talk about it when you come back next time. Okay. His name is Fred Sykes, member of the West Covina City Council. I'm Pomerance. This is California Edition.